I'm the middle sibling of 3 brothers. Both of my brothers grew up as Boy Scouts. My older brother Scott eventually became an Eagle Scout, while my younger brother quit sometime later. For some reason, though, my parents never pushed me to join. That was strange because I was always jealous of Scott. Whenever my mom took me to Pinewood Derby events and Scout celebrations, I watched him with admiration. But the thing I envied most was the camping trips. The troop would disappear into the wilderness for entire weekends, setting up tents, building campfires, and spending nights outdoors. I occasionally rode along when my parents dropped them off, and I'd watch the Scouts preparing their campsite. But since I was younger and not part of the troop, I was never allowed to stay. I always had to go home. My jealousy grew every time I watched Scott prepare for a trip. Before each campout, he would bring home a tent and practice setting it up in our backyard. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I came up with what felt like the greatest idea ever. Why not have our own camping trip in the backyard? Our parents agreed. We set up the tent near the fire pit, and because our neighborhood had huge open yards with very few fences, it actually felt like we were deep in the woods. Large patches of trees separated the properties, making everything seem more adventurous. That evening, my little brother joined us to roast marshmallows around the fire. But when bedtime came, our parents took him back inside. He was only 4 years old and far too young to spend the night outdoors. Once he was gone, Scott and I climbed into our sleeping bags. Back then, the Game Boy Advance SP was the coolest thing a kid could own. We spent some time playing games before finally trying to sleep. Scott fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I felt restless. Maybe it was because I'd never slept in a sleeping bag before. Maybe it was because the ground was uncomfortable. Whatever the reason, I tossed and turned for what felt like hours before finally drifting off. Then I woke up. For a moment, I was confused. I didn't recognize my surroundings. Then I remembered. I was in the tent. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something strange. Scott was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. The tent zipper was still closed, but I assumed he must have gone inside the house because he couldn't sleep. Suddenly, being alone in that tent felt terrifying. I decided to leave too. I slowly unzipped the tent and peeked outside. That's when I saw him. Someone was sitting by the fire pit. At first, I thought it might be Scott. It wasn't. It was a grown man. He sat silently in the darkness, facing the tent, and there was no way he hadn't seen me. My heart stopped. I immediately zipped the tent shut and dove back into my sleeping bag as if a thin layer of fabric could somehow protect me. The tent was almost completely dark. Only faint moonlight filtered through the material. I wanted to call for my dad. I desperately hoped it was him outside, but I knew it wasn't. If it had been my dad, he would have said something when I poked my head out. Then I heard movement. The chair by the fire pit shifted. The man was standing up. I froze. A few moments later, a shadow appeared against the side of the tent, blocking out the moonlight. He was right outside. I held my breath. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, he'd think the tent was empty. Then I heard the zipper. Slowly, very slowly, dragging downward. It only moved a few inches, but that tiny opening was enough. I couldn't help myself. I turned my head slightly toward it. Near the bottom of the tent, where the zipper didn't completely seal, there was a small gap. And inside that gap, an eye, just one eye, staring directly at me. I could see the white of it in the darkness. For several seconds, I couldn't scream. I was completely paralyzed. Then the eye narrowed slightly, as if the person was smiling. The zipper moved another inch. And finally, I screamed. I kicked free of my sleeping bag and scrambled backward, knocking into the tent poles. Immediately, I heard footsteps sprinting away through the yard. A second later, the back porch light exploded on. My dad burst out of the house yelling. By the time he reached the fire pit, whoever had been there was gone. My parents called the police. I barely remember what happened afterward. I spent the rest of the night sleeping in my parents' room. For weeks, I was terrified. Eventually, things started returning to normal, but then something happened that made the experience impossible to forget. A few weeks later, I was at school during recess. The playground was surrounded by a fence facing the street. While playing a game with other kids, I ran toward the fence. That's when a man on the other side called out to me. "Hey!" I turned. The stranger asked me for directions.
I told him I didn't know. Then he asked, "Your name's Chris, right?" My heart stopped. I lied and told him no. The man smiled. "You don't remember me, do you?" I immediately ran to one of the recess supervisors. When we looked back, he was gone. To this day, I'm convinced it was the same man from outside my tent. The thought still terrifies me. I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't screamed that night.